All right, guys. Hey, this is Miss Belvedere, and we're talking about the Great War. You should have grabbed some guided notes to go along with our lesson for today as we go through it. We're going to be investigating the causes and consequences of World War I. The word or the phrase, the Great War, was the name that World War I had before we knew that it was the first of two, right? So later when World War II came around, we started to call this World War I. It was known as the Great War. It was also known as the War to End All Wars. Here we have a picture of what it was like in the trenches during World War I. So kind of interesting taking a look at that. So the power of alliances. Before, we talked about the main causes of World War I, and we have the power of alliances. So what would have been an issue maybe between just two countries now gets involved with everybody else. Despite efforts to ensure peace, the late 1800s saw growing rivalries amongst the greatest powers of Europe, including Britain, France, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Italy, and Russia. Italy gets involved a little bit later. They stay neutral here at the beginning, but this is the idea that we talked about earlier of those two opposing teams that are now being formed, the allies being created, and it just made two polar opposite teams. In an atmosphere of fear and distrust, the great powers set out to protect themselves by forming alliances. Nations signed treaties pledging to defend each other. Allies were being built. They were intended to create powerful combinations that would cause that no one would dare attack. But gradually, two rival alliances were evolved and were involved. So, when we talked last time, we left it off at the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. So this all started with the main causes of World War I, but then it was sparked when two countries, Serbia, a tiny little country in Europe, they went against a huge empire called Austria-Hungary. So what happened in Serbia was that there was this nationalist, this terrorist nationalist called Gavrilo Princip. Gavrilo Princip, we have him here on the left-hand side. And Gavrilo Princip, he was part of a nationalist terrorist group known as the Black Hand. What he did when the Archduke of Austria-Hungary, named Franz Ferdinand, he had a visit to Bosnia. In that visit to Bosnia, the Serbian nationalist crossed over and assassinated the Archduke. This happened on June 28th, 1914, okay? So Gavrilo Princip, we kind of see him here on the left with the little tiny mustache there. And he crossed over to Bosnia, assassinated the Archduke of Austria-Hungary, and he was part of a terrorist group called the Black Hand. Now, exactly 1 month later, in July 28th, 1914, Austria declared war on Serbia. Okay, the war between Austria and Serbia might have just been another simple two-country summer war like most European wars of the previous century. However, the carefully planned alliances soon drew the great powers into conflict. Serbia turned to its ally Russia, and Russia said, "I got your back, let me mobilize and start to get my military ready for war." On August 1st, Germany responded to that military mobilization by declaring war on Russia. Here on the left, or on the right side, we got the German flag that was during World War I, and then we got German soldiers starting to get ready. So allies on allies on allies. Here on the left, we have a French poster that is talking about, so here's a French guy, here's a guy, I think he represents Great Britain, and this is a propaganda poster like we talked about in class. So allies on allies on allies. Because Germany declared war on Russia, Russia in turn appealed to its ally France. Germany demanded that France keep out of the conflict, but France refused. In a result, Germany then declares war on France. By early August, the battle lines were hardening, and Italy and Britain were still uncommitted. So Italy and Britain, they're still not in the war at all, and they decided to stay neutral. Now, in your guided notes, you might be able to see that I have a spot there for you to define neutrality. a policy of supporting neither side of the war, okay? So take a second to fill out what neutrality is. It's a policy of supporting neither side in a war. The U.S. was neutral until halfway through because we didn't want to get involved as well. So next point, Britain had to decide quickly whether or not it's supposed to support its ally France, and they were trying to decide, should we get in the war or should we not? But then Germany actually does something that gets Britain involved, and this is what they do. So Germany is in a dilemma, okay? I know that I have a chart on your guided notes. We're going to do the chart at the very end, all right? So we'll go on to the next slide. Germany, they have a two-front war, okay? What a front is the border that a country meets another country. So here on the bottom, we got this piece of a map. Here is the border between Germany and France. Germany's front is right here. France's front is right there. So it's a front between France and Germany. On the other side of Germany, up this way, Germany has a front with Russia. So Germany, they are fighting a two-front war. How do you split up your military and fight two different fronts and have enough people to fight? So Germany's worst fear was a war on two fronts, with France attacking from the west and Russia from the east. Years earlier, there was a general named General Alfred Schlieffen. If we were in person, I would say Schlieffen, say Schlieffen plan or whatever, Schlieffen. He had developed a strategy to avoid a two-front war, which is this, the Schlieffen plan. The goal was to first defeat France quickly, then to move up and concentrate on Russia. That is the Schlieffen plan, and I'm going to explain it in the next slide. So, the Schlieffen plan. To ensure swift victory in the West, okay, the Schlieffen plan required German armies to march through Belgium. Now, Belgium is not even involved in the war. They are neutral, okay? So here on the map, here is Belgium. All right? So I'll color it in so that you can see it a little bit better. So this is Belgium. The goal for Germany was to go through Belgium and to attack France from behind, because all of the French troops are on the front ready to attack. So if they attack from behind, France won't see it coming. But here's the problem. Germany, France, and Britain had signed a treaty to make sure that no one involves Belgium because they are neutral. They all guaranteed Belgian neutrality. Because this happened and Germany invaded through Belgium and around from behind France, Britain was outraged and they get involved in the war as well. So, there was no time to negotiate. Remember when we talked about two different ways of resolving a problem? We talked about realism and we talked about idealism. Realism is the idea of brute force or war. Idealism was like treaties, talking it out, diplomacy. So I'll just put diplomacy, right? Now that all of these countries were getting involved, it made it almost impossible for countries to be diplomatic about it, and it forced allies to get involved and to start the war. So these military timetables made it impossible for political leaders to negotiate instead of fight, because all of these militaries were ready to go ahead and start the war. Now, on your guys' notes, I have a little list that you have to do. You are listing off which countries are involved. So what you're going to do is you're going to take a look at this map here. Now, in class, we did not talk about who the Central Powers were and who the Allies were, because it changes names. So, we talked about how the Central Powers, this used to be called the Triple Alliance. This now is known as Central Powers. Okay? Then we also talked about what's known the Triple Entente, or Entente, because it's that French word, right? This is now going to be called allies. So what I want you to do for a second is pause this video and label, looking at the map, using your notes. I want you guys to list off here on the bottom who is on what team right now. So go ahead, pause the video. Okay, and we are back. So let's break this down. What I'm going to do actually is I'm going to first pause the video and we're going to continue on part 2. Okay, so see ya.